Hi there, it's just Miss H again. We're just going to continue reading from So Be It, and we are in chapter 22, and the title is Done. Don't be late tonight, Roy. I'm making a pot roast, Ruby called from the porch. Pot roast? Be still, my heart. You haven't made that in ages, Roy called back. Poor thing's nothing but skin and bones, Ruby said. Oh, the pot roast is for Heidi, huh? If it was just going to be me tonight, we'd be having Pop-Tarts in front of the TV, Roy said. I've never served you Pop-Tarts for dinner, and you know it, Roy Franklin. Get out of here now before I change my mind about cooking for you at all. Roy took off his hat, ducked his head, and got into the car. He turned the car around, and as he drove past me, he rolled down his window and called out, You haven't lived until you've had Ruby's pot roast, Heidi. They were trying to make it seem normal, but nothing was normal anymore. I was out in the hammock where I'd taken to spending my days, curled up in a quilt in the nightgown and a pair of thick wool socks. Ruby sometimes came out and sat beside me in the chair, but we didn't talk. I didn't have anything to say. Bernie called a lot, but I didn't feel like talking to her either. I knew she and Roy were trying to figure out what to do about Mama and the funeral, but I really didn't want to hear about that. A little while later, Ruby came out of her house carrying a stack of magazines in her arms. She pulled the chair up beside the hammock, but I turned my face away from her. I know you don't want to think about it, Heidi, but we have to talk about tomorrow. Roy's going down to Sullivan County Airport this afternoon to pick up the casket. There are some important things we need to decide. I loosened one foot from the tangle of quilt and hung it over the edge of the hammock so I could push off from the ground and swing. I was thinking, maybe you'd like me to cut your hair, she said. I hooked my foot around the leg of her chair to stop myself in mid-swing. Why do you want to cut my hair? I asked. I thought maybe you'd like to fix yourself up a little tomorrow before the service, she said. What service? I asked. The pastor from the Methodist Church is going to speak, she told me. What's he going to say? He didn't know, Mama, I said. Someone has to say a few words, Heidi, she said. Roy had told me that he and Bernie had talked and that she decided it'd be best for Mama to be buried in Liberty, where she'd been born and raised. They talked about burying her in Reno, too, next to her mother. Roy made some calls and found out Diane DeMuth was in a potter's field on the west side of town, but in the end, Bernie thought Liberty would be better. They'd asked me what I thought, of course, but I told them that I didn't care. I want you to look at these magazines, Ruby said, just to give you an idea. I'm pretty good at it. I cut Roy's hair and some of the neighbors, too. She left the magazines on the chair and went inside. After a while, I reached out and pulled them into my nest. On every cover was a different beautiful woman with red lips and shiny hair and teeth, so white and square and perfect. They reminded me of chiclets. I couldn't believe how different ways there were for a person to wear her hair. The pages were filled with words like upswept and feathered and windblown and over again natural. Wouldn't the most natural thing be not to cut your hair at all? I wondered. I gathered the quilt cocoon around me and went inside through the house and into the bathroom. I opened the medicine cabinet and found what I was looking for, a pair of silver nail scissors. Standing in front of the mirror, I began to cut the triangles out of my hair, carefully at first, and then with angry chopping motions that hurt and pulled so much that I began to cry for the first time since Mama died. Ruby heard me and came and took the scissors away. She held me while I cried, and when I was through, she pressed a cool washcloth against my face. Then she ran warm water in the sink and gently washed my hair. Afterward, I followed her out to the kitchen, still wrapped in the quilt, and sat on the tall kitchen stool while she cut my hair. She turned the radio on and hummed along with the music while she worked, turning my head from side to side, steering me by the chin to make sure it was even. When she was finished, she dried it with a hairdryer and a big round brush. Then she blew on my face and neck to get rid of any tiny little hairs that might be sticking to my skin. Do you want to see? She asked me. I pulled the quilt tighter around my shoulders and started to stand up. A shower of curls and tiny brown prickles fell through the air and onto the floor. Leave the quilt here, Heidi. It's covered with hair, Ruby said. No sense dragging it through the house. I'll sweep up in here later. Reluctantly, I shed the quilt and Ruby led me back into the bathroom, where she stood behind me, fluffing my hair with her fingers while I looked at it myself in the mirror. I wasn't me anymore. I was some other girl. Some girl with short brown, curly hair. Some girl with a new haircut and no mama. What do you think? Said Ruby. I don't know, I said. That's okay, she told me. You don't have to know. And that is the end of chapter 22.